Hello, I'm Dr. Pola Rosen. I'm the publisher of Education Update, and it's my great pleasure to be here today in New York City with the CEO of YAI, Stephen Freeman. You might be asking, what is YAI? And Stephen, would you be, first of all, thank you for letting us come, but tell us what YAI stands for and the kind of work that you've been doing over so many years, since 1957, in fact.
That's correct, Paula. Thank you for having us. A group of parents in 1957, 13 parents, who were sharing a common pediatrician, met each other, and their doctor recommended that, because their children had special needs at the time, sort of undefined and undescribed, that these parents get together and meet with a psychologist to do some life planning. And in 1957, the availability of services was extremely limited. And through this psychologist, he started an after-school program, basically a recreation and socialization program. And as their children progressed to adolescence and then early and late teens, they started thinking about what's the next step for a young adult. And those parents got together, and with the help of our agency and New York City at the time, because it was the only funding source available for people with special needs in a group home environment, we created a group home in 1971.
Would you say that that was one of the first group homes in the state of New York?
It actually was one of the first.
Amazing.
At the same time that we were developing, I think one or two others were developed across the state. And that particular facility grew into housing almost 24 people over the next 3 years. In 1975, the whole world changed in New York State for disabilities. Geraldo Rivera, working for ABC News, climbed over a fence at the Willowbrook State School on Staten Island with a camera crew, and showed some of the most horrible conditions known to mankind in treating people. From that ensued a class action by a group of parents, and the rest is history. The field really began to grow. The state and the federal government had a mandate to empty out the institutions. And the models that they created for adults were group homes and some type of activity during the day. YAI really experienced its major growth shortly after that. We were well positioned, having already opened one group home, and in the next, from 1977, when I arrived here, through 1992, we opened approximately 48 group homes. There is a huge number. We have almost 758 people living in group homes right now. But it's only one small part of what YAI does. So you ask, what is YAI? It's sort of a one-stop shopping for parents who have children who have varying special needs. Our predominant population is developmental disabilities. And I'm sure later we can talk a little bit about how people on the spectrum, autism, has impacted most recently. But for the most part, in the early days, that term was mental retardation. And so we began opening a model of services that said around every group home, we needed a program for people to learn during the day. For some who had extreme needs, more in the severe and profound category, we opened our day treatment programs. And these programs were geared towards helping people learn to toilet themselves, eat, basic daily skill, dress themselves.
Now, were the students taken out of the group home for those programs?
That's correct. And so they traveled together to another site, and a number of group homes came together in one site. And that model, to some degree, still exists today, but we'll talk a little bit about how the world has changed and how I'm trying to transform this organization, having been here myself all these years, into a completely different model. So the group home and the day programs, whatever activity was going on during that day, grew to much more, I think, sophisticated kinds of approaches and understanding individuals. So now we have employment programs at YAI. We have after-school programs similar to the one that started the agency. We have in-home respite programs and in-home counseling programs. We have a unique program called Parents with Special Needs. These are two parents who they themselves have a developmental disability, who marry and have a child. And not unusual that their child is typically developing, doesn't have any special needs. These parents need to understand, how do I raise a child in a world where I may be a little bit different, but my child is the same as others? And so we train these parents on parenting skills. And we have a number of programs that is so boutique and unique like that. So these community-based programs, the group homes, the day programs, the employment programs, and then finally we added on, starting about 1997, a series of rehab and medical programs to YAI, which has grown extensively. So we have our own occupational therapy, physical therapy, and psychology programs We have 5 centers that do that. And in 1997, we opened our first medical center in one of the allied programs with YAI.
Where is that?
Well, we have 5 sites. We have one in Manhattan, we have one in Queens, we have 2 in Brooklyn, we have one in the Bronx.
Are they independent or are they attached to hospitals?
They're all independent, freestanding medical practices, and they run the full range of services from primary care to about 16 different specialties. We have psychiatry, psychology, occupational therapy, speech therapy. So for a parent who enters the YI system, and as we talk in a little while about how do they get into the system at an early age, which is our school programs, the New York League for Early Learning provides that. That parent enters, and for the rest of their life, they can be supported by our organization at every stage.
They never need to step outside of the organization. It sounds like it's all encompassing
It
and
is.
all embracing.
And that's our basic strength here in our approach, to have a consolidated, unified service. It is so difficult for a young parent to navigate the system that exists right now, let alone those who recently came to America to try to even understand that what we try to provide them is an easy entry into the system and support throughout. And one of the ways we do that is we keep everything in-house, with the exception of inpatient hospitalization.
Right.
And we're affiliated with a number of hospitals to do that.
So how many people are currently being served by YAI and how many people are currently working for YAI?
So we use round numbers because our openings, we continue to grow. In some programs, we consolidate. We have about 5,200 staff. It's a very large organization. And that's located through New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands. We also do national training for other organizations and other government entities. But for the most part, we're around 5,200 staff. Of that, about 3,700 are full-time, and others are part-time practitioners and clinicians who join us in a variety of sectors. We serve somewhere in the area about 20,000 people a day, from our early childhood and preschool programs to our group homes, to our day programs, employment, and all the others that I listed. And these are individual contacts of people who may go from a group home to a day program. Sometimes they overlap, so our people use our clinics, our group homes, and our day programs. It's a very complicated system that we try to make simple for the parent. So when you look from the outside in, the parent sees this whole seamless. Operating a program like this for us has been somewhat challenging, but at the same time extremely rewarding.
Well, so what are some of the great challenges that you face? And is your organization unique in this country? Is anybody else your competitor or doing what you do?
So there are a lot of organizations that do parts of what we do individually, and some who do much of what we do, but no one that I have seen who does all of what we do.
Right.
Both in terms of service delivery, age-wise, or geographically located. So we are the largest of our kind. What the challenges are is depending on when we're talking. So today we're sitting in an environment where the government is shut down, for example, and we're sitting where the resources are diminishing, and that there's a economic problem going on in the country, and the typical taxpayer isn't really interested so much in helping others when they themselves don't have a job. Generally speaking, the world has changed around the view of how people who have special needs are perceived by the outside world. I see that both as a challenge and an opportunity. We have spent too much time thinking about people with disabilities as these poor, unfortunate individuals who God placed on earth and we need to help them. I see it more as an opportunity to challenge people who have their own challenges to be as much as they can be. And the success stories that we have encountered and those that happen outside of our system are amazing. People are born today without legs and they're running in the Olympics. People are born today without language, without speech, with severe brain damage, and they're holding down jobs. People at the far end of the Asperger's spectrum are holding down IT positions in the Silicon Valley. We need to rethink in this country what our expectations are of people with disabilities, set the standard and the bar much higher, and move towards that bar. For the typical parent, at the moment of birth, the pediatrician, those who aren't well trained, generally would say, well, I want you to understand your child will never walk. He may never talk, definitely won't go to school, college, he'll have special needs. At that moment, most parents have set an expectation that has been set for them so low that they don't even know where to begin. and all they want for their child is to be healthy and live without anything else. The average parent, when their child is born, it's the most joyous occasion in the world. They're thinking about their child going to college, becoming a professional, getting married, having a family, and entering society. We need to rethink how our service deliverers treat parents, particularly in the medical professions and those in early childhood. And that's what we're doing here. We're telling our parents, we don't know. Honestly, we don't know how much your child can achieve, but we're going to have them try as much as we can to push themselves. And the stories here, we have people who are getting married at YAI, who entered our school system, moved into a group home. We have people who are entering our employment program and achieving some amazing jobs. We have a child who was on the spectrum, went to our school, went to our day program, no language, all the stereotypical signs of autism, rocking, finger twirling. We found him a job in a car wash because we found that he was so interested in working with machines that vibrated. Whatever the interest was, and whatever we need to do to unlock that kind of thinking, he's now taking towels out of an extractor and giving it to people, and he's making money. He's earning a job at $10,000 a year, where the state was probably paying us $20,000 a year to train him in a school. That, to me, is the example of where this world should be going and where parents and practitioners need to start thinking.
Well, you know, you're reminding me of one of my favorite historical figures, Winston Churchill. And the great Winston said many years ago, the mark of a society and the way we judge a society is the way it treats its most challenged citizens. And it seems to me that YAI is certainly doing the most spectacular job with that group of individuals. So Winston Churchill would be proud of you.
And Winston Churchill is one of my heroes as well. And the concept behind never taking no for an answer, expecting so much more from ourselves, is an incredible concept that we have now put together in our own saying here at YAI. So the theme that I've instilled in the last few years is the theme of living, loving, and working. That we are more alike than we are different, no matter who we are. That even those who can't tell us, and most of our population can, they want a nice place to live, they want good relationships, and they want to do something productive with their life. They want to feel good about what they do each day. That makes a healthy, happy human being. There's a whole lot of studies being done now on happiness, and what is happiness? In my opinion, if you have a good place to live, good relationships, a good job, a good productive activity, you're going to feel good about yourself. And the living, loving, and working theme is instilled in every one of our programs here. So we're creating better working opportunities, better living environments, and more opportunities for people to meet each other. Socializing for people with a disability is very hard. There are no websites where people meet each other and their parents are kind of frightened about letting them go on one. There are no centers where people actually get to go, and when they do, they're not so comfortable. So we've created a whole lot of new programs that are sort of state-of-the-art to have people meet each other, to find jobs, to increase the interest from employers. We have a program in YI where we spend 6 months in a corporation for those who are interested in us coming in, and we sort of induce their interest through tax incentives that's available through the federal government and the state, where we train their staff. What we found over time is those employees that we place are most successful when the worksite staff are ready to accept them. Because our population behaves somewhat differently than you might expect in a typical workforce. So they might interrupt you at work, they might ask you a lot of questions. How do you react to that? During lunch hour, somebody comes over and sits with you and starts talking to you in phrases that you don't understand. How do you react? We spent 6 months training and raising the sensitivity level and educating the workforce. Most of our employees then enter the system after they've been trained, and they're accepted. They're almost eager to see what the other individuals who are waiting for them have to offer, and vice versa. So preparing the world for disabilities, changing the idea of what they can achieve, has to be a major goal of organizations like ours.
Well, you are uniquely positioned to be able to do that kind of training because you have a background in social work, and I understand that you were at Hunter College.
Yes.
And so President Jennifer Reb is a good friend of this newspaper. She'd be proud of you. I'm going to see her later this afternoon and talk about you.
That would be great. You should say hello. The most difficult thing for me is to say anything good about myself, but I'll do the best that I can. I was recently inducted into the Hunter College Hall of Fame.
Wonderful.
And it was a wonderful ceremony, and I took my family, and there's a plaque hanging in the 68th Street campus site. I'm a native New Yorker, although I traveled all over the world, and I had an opportunity to visit a lot of places, but New York is my home. I understand New York, I'm New York centric. I went to the public schools here, I went to Queens College, and then I went out to Hunter College. And my background in social work was basically instilled in my early life. I lived on the same block with what is now known as a world-renowned organization, the Henry Street Settlement.
Sure.
And so my first exposure to the concept of community-based help was the Henry Street Settlement. And that led me towards my career in social work.
It's wonderful. I love speaking with you about this. Let me go back to some of the nuts and bolts. A parent has a multiply handicapped child, developmental challenge, and doesn't know what on earth to do. The child is now just a few days old. They don't know how to navigate the system. It is difficult. You said so yourself. What do you suggest as a starting point? Should they come right to YAI and say what to do? Give me the roadmap. What should they do?
This becomes, for most parents, the most challenging time in their entire life. They've been hit by what is a most incredibly uncomfortable, depressing, and challenging experience. They're still coming out of it. We've created a department here called YAI Link. And YAI Link's sole job is to give parent the support, comfort, and education, and lead them into a roadmap for a lifetime. And so what YAI Link does is you are assigned a sensitive, caring social worker who understands the needs of young families who recently have had a birth of a child with special needs. They will immediately engage you on giving you a lay of the land, so to speak, a perspective of what to expect in entering the system. Their goal is to do twofold. It's information, support, and eventually referral into our system or out of our system to other places if we don't actually have the service that they need. Through a very simple application that can be either filled out online from their own home. Parents with kids with special needs can't get out a lot. And most organizations don't think about the very practical issues of having a parent receive services. So often they'll call a parent in. The parent has to find a babysitter, they may not be able to. So most of our work can be done on the phone. If they don't do it online, we can take the information over the phone. And from that point on, they're assigned a customer representative or a navigator who helps them understand not only our system, but the entitlements that are due them, and the system at large, which can be extremely complicated. I've been doing this now almost 38 years, and as the rules and regulations change, and as departments who do oversight change, it becomes almost impossible for an individual who doesn't do this all the time to understand how to get through that system.
Do you find that some parents hire attorneys to help them navigate?
So at varying points in the individual's life, transitional points predominantly, occasionally an attorney is necessary. We most often see attorneys brought into the education system. So let me give you an example. A child is 3 years old, and they are entitled, and we should talk a little bit about the entitlements because most parents don't know what they are. They're entitled to a preschool education that is funded by the City of New York through the State Education Department of New York State.
Right.
However, as the child works through the years 3, 4, and 5, at the age of 5, they need to transition out into a school system, into a school-age program, as it's called in our field. At that point, many parents cannot find a public school in their area who has the appropriate resources, teaching staff, and programs to train their child with disabilities. At that time, those parents who understand the system often hire an attorney to help them navigate the next step. Because there is a program in place where if you are able to visit a sufficient number of schools offered to you by the New York Department of Education and cannot find an appropriate classroom for your child and can make a reasonable case to the city will pay a portion or all of that tuition to a private school. But that's a legal process.
Yes, right.
That's involved. And
You don't provide attorneys?
No, we don't provide attorneys. We have a list of, there are only maybe 5 or 6 attorneys in all of New York City who specialize in this area, and we provide them with the full list and ask them to sort of look at who's most comfortable for them.
Now, what about those children who come to you for services or are receiving services from you in the schools? Are those paid for by the government as well?
Yeah, so we operate basically two types of program. One very small, recently opened, and the other fairly large, if not the biggest in the state. We operate an early intervention and preschool system. The early intervention system is funded through the Department of Health, City of New York, through the State of New York Department of Health. That's an entitlement program which requires an eligibility review, but it's not income-based. The eligibility review is based on the needs of the child. If after certain evaluations, it is assessed that your child does qualify for services, it's sent over from the evaluator to the New York City Department of Education or Department of Health, depending on their age group. Department of Health oversees birth through 3, and the New York City Department of Education and the State Education Department oversees 3 through 5 and thereafter. So once the official municipal entity approves the evaluation needs, the child can then be forwarded or asked to go to a particular school by the City of New York. And they receive services free of charge to the individual. Obviously, it's state taxes, the state money that's paying for it, but they don't have to pay for themselves. So there is no income requirement typically that you might think for this kind of a service. And that will be the same for children 3 to 5. It requires a needs-based assessment that is done by an organization that just specializes in evaluations. We do evaluations. We refer outside to other schools. We refer to our own schools. And we refer to children saying, your kid's fine. We do see, given some trends that are happening, parents have some major concerns about mercury-based vaccinations, and so they think there's something wrong with their child. A large percentage of parents who bring their children to us for an evaluation, they fall into the typical range of developing. Some kids speak a little bit later than others, as you know. Some kids may have a little bit slower motor development. So we don't refer them for services. We'd say, watch your child and bring them back in a year if you still think it's an issue. But those who do need services, it's paid for by the city and the state.
Right. Now, I visited the Arc of San Diego. In fact, I was very fortunate. I got an award from them years ago. And I visited a facility where developmentally disabled adults, ranging in age anywhere from 21 to 50, were in a facility and they were learning certain skills. They were packaging things that were going to be used in our society. Do you have anything like that?
We, I think if I understand what you described what used to be termed a sheltered workshop. This workshop was designed initially to provide a work-like experience, which is work for individuals who couldn't work in a typical environment at the time. And so they package all kinds of things. The airlines industry, when you open up the fork, the knife, the spoon, all of those things are usually packaged by a sheltered workshop.
Right.
Pens are put together consistently by sheltered workshops. It's been our belief, shortly after we opened, we had some workshops, that it was isolating individuals and not really getting them to achieve the full optimization of their abilities. And so we closed our sheltered workshops 30 years ago. And in place, we decided to create relationships with corporate entities to get real jobs, in my opinion. What's happened in New York State, and this is typical across the country, is we've done a great job here in providing caring, nurturing services for people that the institution that I spoke about earlier never was able to do. But now it's time to go to the next step. We've made a lot of the people that we have supported living in the community, but not necessarily a part of the community. And here's where I think YAI differs from other organizations. We are pushing the envelope to get people more integrated into everyday activities in the community, to join civic associations, to have jobs, to use all the facilities. You know, it's one thing to live in a group home, get on a bus, go to your program, your training school, go back home, on the weekends go bowling in the same group of people. And so you're not an institution, you're in the community, but you're really not part of it. We're looking for more individualized, self-chosen experiences for the population. And when you ask people, what do you want to live in our group homes, they will tell you when they can. And if they can't, you learn techniques to understand it. Not what we decide bowling's a good activity this weekend. If you ask people enough, they'll tell you, I hate bowling. You take me every weekend bowling. I'd rather go to the movies. I love music. Many of our population have particular hobbies that they would just love to do. And it becomes a challenge for us to individually try to help them fulfill it. It's much easier for organizations like us to put people in groups of 5 or 8 or 10 and move them from one place to another. It's much more difficult to find out how do we get this person's interest in stamp collecting on a Saturday to go out there and support them while we have 9 other people to take care of. And that's been sort of our most recent discussions here, meeting the needs of the individuals so that they can fulfill a really wonderful life to reach and achieve happiness that we talked about earlier.
I think that's spectacular, because I think one of the things that we haven't done is to ask individuals. We assume because they can't verbalize that they don't know, and we should then therefore assign them something. Geraldo Rivera, who you spoke about, made the quantum leap when he leaped over that fence and did his stories about exposés of Willowbrook. That was a change in the atmosphere, in the scene of special education. What is the next step for us? What do you think?
Great question. So the next step is exactly where I just started talking about, getting people who we support to have a much greater part in society. When I was on my honeymoon, a long time ago, longer than I even can imagine anymore, we wound up in Denmark, my wife and I. We were traveling around. And what struck me about being in Denmark in 1975 was that people with disabilities were on buses, they were working, they were everywhere, and they weren't there in groups, they were there individually. That whatever accommodations they need to get onto the bus were built by the government. And whatever possibilities they had for jobs, people were open to giving it to them. And they were so integrated into the world that it became not different. It wasn't as though somebody now rolls down the street in a wheelchair and people still look at them a little bit, or they go in groups. That wasn't the case in Denmark. What we need to do here in the United States is to offer more opportunities for people with special needs, people who have these challenges, people who are different, to become a greater member of society. And we need to challenge ourselves. We have a program that starts very early. We have an integrated classroom. It started out where most of our staff needed daycare. So we said to them, why don't you come and have your children be in a classroom with kids with special needs during the day? And some took the opportunity. And what it did was, it offered us a daycare opportunity and them, but it also began to teach these children at age 3, side by side, what it was like to be next to a child with a disability. And we found that their attitudes and values as they grew up were so different,
Right.
than those who never were exposed to
Absolutely.
this. So if you begin to change the attitudes towards a more integrated society, if you begin to open up doors and opportunities through funding and advocacy, if you begin to be creative in thinking about how do I use new technology to assist that person to do something that he couldn't do, that's the next frontier. That's where this organization is pushing the envelope, both with New York State and its funding sources, its creative thinking. Between what we know now about brain science and how the brain works, what people can achieve, and what technology can offer, we're working very closely now with Samsung to develop a medication dispenser. Right now, staff have to pour out the medications, they have to hand it over to somebody. What that does is it makes the individual dependent on the staff person they're working with. If you can push a button and have it dispensed adequately, and that machine also alerts somebody if you didn't take it, you're now leading somebody to be more independent and not dependent. And so the next level of what this organization is moving towards and the world needs to move is an interdependency. You and I have friends.
Is that going to be a chip that's implanted? Is that what you're referring to, or just something?
No, this is a small device that they're working on. What we have seen now is that most corporations that are working, Sony, Samsung, Panasonic, the larger ones, are realizing that the baby boomers are coming of age. And they want to sort of age in place, given that your parents' generation might have thought about going to Florida, or sort of just gone somewhere else, or maybe entered a nursing home at some point. Baby boomers are not thinking like that. They want to figure out, what do I need to stay in place? Well, what's the great equalizer? Our population always needed to figure out how to stay in place. They walked a little bit slower, as you do when you get older. They think a little bit slower. So the major corporations are saying, how do I create all kinds of support resources that will help the baby boomers stay in place. And they're beginning to use our organization as a beta site to see, does it work? When you open the refrigerator, can I take your blood pressure? May not be important to you, but to the child who lives in Indiana, whose mother didn't open the refrigerator for 24 hours and now realizes he didn't get an alert, that becomes an issue. So all of these things that we're working on with these different corporations, and we've assigned one person who we recently employed, who was a major VP at IBM, to work with us on developing corporate relationships to help push the envelope of bringing us together to create new technology to promote independence.
Sounds absolutely wonderful. I'm going to wrap it up now. My last question is, what do you do about the training of staff? Do you offer teachers and other individuals, training and actually even internships and degree training opportunities? And I just want to preface it by saying that I went to the first graduation given by a museum. The American Museum of Natural History last week gave a PhD, and that's something unheard of in our society. It's always been a regular college or university. So I now pose the question, do you do any training or granting of certificates and degrees?
Yeah, we do a lot of that. We started out as an organization, well, most of the organizations in the field have people who just wanted to do good. Husband and wife all ran a group home. We decided we wanted to professionalize the field. So we predominantly hire people with a college degree, very different than other organizations. We have a huge education and training program that works from the moment you come in orientation to every step of acquiring clinical and other educational skills necessary to do the best intervention. We make videotapes that we use within our own program and we sell all over the country. It's been a wonderful opportunity for us to connect with other states in this country, and it's become a small business for us in some way. So our videotapes are in-home training. We are very closely aligned with CUNY in a special program in CUNY that is training people to work with our population in our field. They provide a certificate. They provide training on site in some of our programs, so we've had a lot of graduates who've gone through this professional training program for disabilities. And finally, we offer an incentive to retain our well-trained staff that we put a lot of time and effort into by going back to school for graduate degrees, by supporting them through tuition reimbursement and other programs so we can maintain a continuity and help educate them at the same time.
Steve, thank you so much for letting me come and letting us come and sharing all your wonderful insights, your expertise. I feel like we're in very good hands in this nation with you at the helm. Thank you.
Thank you very much.